I signed the sublease agreement without reading it, and that was my first life's fatal mistake. The pen left my hand before I noticed the clause buried in page 7. Primary tenant retains rights to property access and decision-making authority. My cousin Jade's boyfriend, Trevor, stood behind her with that politician's smile he always wore, the one that made my aunt call him such a catch. I was 24, freshly arrived in the city with a teaching certificate and hope. They were doing me a favour, they said. The apartment was in a prime school district. The rent was reasonable. Family helps family. 6 months later, I came home to find the locks changed. You understand, don't you, Sienna? Jade said through the door, her voice saccharine with false regret. Trevor's sister needs a place. You're not even on the lease officially. We gave you a month's notice in the group chat. You must have missed it. I hadn't missed it. They'd sent it at 3 a.m, buried under 50 messages about a birthday party I wasn't invited to. My belongings were in garbage bags on the landing. The building manager, Mr. Patterson, wouldn't meet my eyes. Later, I learned Trevor had been paying him for months to ignore the subletting violations. I spent that night in a hostel, the next 3 weeks in a colleague's spare room, and the following 2 years clawing my way back to stability. The school district job went to someone with a permanent address. My savings evaporated on deposit fees for apartments that fell through. Jade blocked my number. My aunt said I was creating drama over a misunderstanding. The breaking point came when I saw their engagement photos on social media. They were standing in front of the apartment. My apartment, the one I'd paid into for 6 months, the one that still had the curtains I'd hung, with a caption about building our future together. 300 likes. My aunt had commented, "So proud of you both." I died angry. A bus I didn't see, an intersection I crossed every day, a moment of distraction. I was 26, living in a building with black mould because it was what I could afford, still trying to rebuild what they had destroyed. Then I woke up on the morning I signed that sublease agreement, pen in my hand, Jade's expectant smile across the table. This time, I set the pen down. I need to read this thoroughly first, I said, my voice calm. I'll return it tomorrow. Jade's smile whistle tightened. Sienna, come on, don't you trust family? I trust contracts, I replied, sliding the papers into my bag. I'll have an answer by Friday. That evening, I sat in my current apartment, the tiny studio I'd be leaving in 2 weeks, according to my first timeline, and read every word. The sublease was a masterpiece of exploitation. I wasn't listed as a tenant. I had no legal standing. The month's notice clause was buried and vaguely worded. The rent I'd pay was actually $200 more than the apartment's. Actual cost. They were profiting off me while maintaining complete control. I photographed every page, created a digital folder with documentation, and scheduled a consultation with a tenant rights attorney I found through the State Bar Association. The consultation cost me $75 I could barely spare, but it was the best investment I ever made. The attorney, Ms. Rodriguez, was a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who'd specialised in housing law for 2 decades. She reviewed the sublease with the kind of clinical precision that told me she'd seen variations of this scheme countless times. This agreement is designed to give you no protection whatsoever, she said, highlighting sections with a yellow marker. You'd be paying rent with no lease rights, no eviction protections, and no recourse if they decided to terminate the arrangement. Additionally, this clause here, she tapped page 9, indemnifies them against any legal action you might take. You'd essentially be signing away your ability to sue for wrongful eviction. Is it legal? Barely. It's structured just carefully enough to avoid being outright fraud, but it's exploitative. The fact that they're charging you more than the actual rent while maintaining you're not a legal tenant is particularly egregious. She leaned back. My professional advice? Don't sign this. Find legitimate housing with a proper lease that protects your rights as a tenant. I paid her fee, thanked her for her time, and left with a folder full of notes about what to look for in a legitimate lease agreement. On Friday, I met Jade at a coffee shop, not her apartment. I brought the unsigned sublease and my folder of documentation. "I can't sign this," I said, placing the papers on the table. "But thank you for the offer." Her expression cycled through confusion, irritation, and calculation. "Did someone tell you something? Because if this is about that stupid rumour, it's about Clause 7, Section 3, and Clause 9, Section 2, I interrupted. "I consulted with a tenant rights lawyer. This agreement would leave me with no legal protections. I'd essentially be a guest in your home, not a tenant. And this indemnification clause means I couldn't seek legal recourse if you violated the terms." "A lawyer? Sienna, that's so dramatic. I also found the actual listing for the apartment. The rent is $1,800, not the $2,000 you're charging me. And subletting isn't allowed per the building's lease terms, which I verified with the property management company." Trevor appeared at her shoulder, that smile already in place. "Hey, Sienna, Jade said you had some concerns. Let's talk this through." "There's nothing to discuss. I'm declining the offer. I hope you find someone suitable." I stood, shouldering my bag. "I also feel obligated to mention that subletting in violation of your lease could result in eviction. You might want to consult with your landlord before proceeding with any arrangement." I didn't wait for a response. The search for legitimate housing consumed my evenings for the next 2 weeks. I attended tenant rights workshops, learned to spot red flags in lease agreements, and networked through teacher forums. That's how I found Mrs. Chen Shen's building. The listing was straightforward. Rent-controlled one-bedroom apartment, stable, long-term tenants preferred. No pets, no subletting, no exceptions. Comprehensive application required. The rent was reasonable for the neighbourhood, which was near 3 major school districts. The building was older but well-maintained. Mrs. Chen was a 72-year-old former principal with sharp eyes and sharper instincts. She interviewed me twice before showing the apartment, asking detailed questions about my employment, my teaching philosophy, my long-term plans. She checked references meticulously, called my school directly to verify my position, and reviewed my credit history. "I've owned this building for 30 years, she told me over tea in her ground floor apartment before the second showing. "I've seen every scheme, every excuse, every attempt to circumvent proper procedures. I prioritise teachers because I understand the profession, but I don't make exceptions to my standards. The lease is comprehensive, the rules are clear, and violations result in immediate eviction proceedings. Is that acceptable to you?" "Completely acceptable," I said. "I want security and clear expectations. That's exactly what you're offering." She showed me the apartment, larger than Jade's, with better natural light, updated appliances, and a small balcony. The building had a secure entry system, on-site laundry, and a tenant agreement that prohibited subletting, required written permission for guests staying longer than 2 weeks, and clearly outlined maintenance responsibilities. The lease was 12 pages of crystal-clear legal language. Mrs. Chen gave me a week to review it, encouraged me to have an attorney examine it, and provided references from current tenants. I read it 4 times, had Ms. Rodriguez review it for another $75 consultation, and confirmed every clause with Ms. Chen before signing. "You're the first applicant in 5 years to actually have a lawyer review the lease," Mrs. Chen said when I returned the signed documents. "That tells me you're serious about doing this correctly." I learned recently that documentation is everything. "Smart girl, welcome home, Sienna." I moved in 3 weeks later, paid first and last month's rent, plus a reasonable security deposit, and received copies of every document in triplicate. My name was on the lease as the sole tenant with full legal rights. I had a home. 2 months later, my aunt called. Jade told me you rejected their generous offer. I'm disappointed, Sienna. Family should support family. I agree, I said. That's why I couldn't let them violate their lease terms and risk legal trouble. Subletting without landlord permission could have gotten them evicted. I mentioned this concern to them when I declined. The silence stretched. Well, I suppose you think you know better than everyone? I know what a fair contract looks like. I consulted with a tenant rights attorney to make sure I understood the legal implications. I hope Jade and Trevor are well. She hung up without saying goodbye. My new life took shape with deliberate precision. The school district job materialised exactly as before. Same interview, same panel, same questions. This time, when they asked about housing stability, I provided Mrs. Chen's contact information and my lease showing a 2-year term with an option to renew. The assistant principal, Dr. Williams, nodded approvingly. We had a candidate last year who seemed promising, but her housing situation was unstable, she said. She ended up having to move out of district within 6 months. We value teachers who plan ahead and demonstrate stability. I got the position. The first family gathering I attended after declining the apartment was deliberately awkward. My aunt hosted a birthday dinner for my grandmother, and absence would have been conspicuous. I arrived with a gift and a pleasant demeanour, prepared for confrontation. Jade and Trevor were already there, their body language tight with tension. They'd positioned themselves near the kitchen, away from the main gathering. My aunt greeted me with forced brightness, and my grandmother hugged me warmly, oblivious to any undercurrents. Sienna, we hear you're teaching at Madison Elementary now, my grandmother said. That's a wonderful school. I'm very lucky. The position came with excellent benefits and support for professional development. And you found a nice apartment? This from my aunt, her tone probing. A rent-controlled unit near the school. My landlord is a retired principal who owns the building. The lease is very fair and the location is perfect for my commute. Jade spoke from across the room, her voice carrying an edge. Must be nice, having everything work out so conveniently. The room quieted. I met her gaze calmly. I'm grateful for the stability. It took careful planning and research, but yes, things are working out well. Some of us don't have the luxury of being so picky about housing. Everyone has the right to safe, legal housing arrangements, I replied. I hope your situation resolves positively. My grandmother looked between us confused. My aunt jumped in with forced cheerfulness. Let's not discuss stressful topics at a birthday party. Who wants cake? The subject was dropped, but the tension remained. I stayed for an appropriate amount of time, helped clean up, and left without incident. As I was gathering my coat, my grandmother pulled me aside. What happened with you and Jade? She asked quietly. Your aunt won't explain, but something's wrong. I considered how much to... a reveal. They offered me a sublease arrangement that would have left me with no legal tenant rights. I declined after consulting with a lawyer. I don't think Jade appreciated my caution. My grandmother studied me with the same sharp intelligence that had made her a successful accountant for 40 years. You consulted a lawyer about a family arrangement? I consulted a lawyer about a legal contract that would have governed my housing. The fact that family was involved made it more important to ensure clarity, not less. She patted my hand. Smart? Never mix family and business without proper documentation. I taught your aunt that, but I don't think she listened. She smiled sadly. I'm proud of you for protecting yourself, even if it caused friction. 6 months passed. I'd settled into my teaching position, developed strong relationships with students and colleagues, and begun saving money at a rate that would have seemed impossible in my first timeline. The difference was simple. My rent was fixed and fair. I had no fear of sudden eviction, and I could plan financially because my housing was secure. Mrs. Chen introduced me to other teachers in the building. 3 of the 8 units were occupied by educators, and we formed an informal study group that met monthly to discuss curriculum development, classroom management strategies, and district politics. These connections led to collaborative projects that caught the attention of district administrators. When the assistant principal position opened at a magnet school across town, Dr. Williams recommended me. The interview process was rigorous, but my portfolio of collaborative curriculum projects and my track record of stability made me a strong candidate. I got the position. The promotion came with a significant raise and a housing stipend, a benefit designed to help retain teachers in high-cost urban areas. I could have moved to a luxury apartment, upgraded to something more impressive. Instead, I stayed in Mrs. Chen's building and invested the stipend in retirement savings and professional development. You could afford a nicer place, my colleague Amanda mentioned during the celebration dinner. A doorman building, maybe? Granite countertops? I have something better than granite countertops, I replied. I have a landlord who respects tenant rights, a lease that protects me, and a community of neighbours who look out for each other. That's worth more than luxury finishes. Year 2 of my second life brought unexpected news through the family grapevine. Jade and Trevor's building was being inspected for multiple violations. The news came from my grandmother, who'd heard it from my aunt, who'd heard it from Jade in a panicked phone call. Someone reported them for illegal subletting, my grandmother told me over our monthly lunch. The landlord is threatening eviction. Your aunt is beside herself. Did they go through with the subletting plan? Apparently Trevor's sister moved in last year. They've been charging her rent while she's not on the lease. My grandmother sipped her tea. Your aunt wants to know if you can help. She thinks because you consulted a lawyer before, you might know what they can do. The time to consult a lawyer was before they violated their lease, not after they got caught, I said. If they're in eviction proceedings, they need legal representation, not advice from me. I can give them Ms. Rodriguez's contact information, but that's all I can offer. I'll tell your aunt. My grandmother paused. This is what you tried to warn them about, isn't it? I declined their subletting offer because it violated lease terms and left me with no legal protection. Told them subletting could result in eviction. They chose to proceed anyway, with Trevor's sister instead of you. Yes. My grandmother nodded slowly. So they did exactly what they'd planned to do with you, just with someone else. And now they're facing the consequences you avoided by walking away. That's an accurate summary. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I'm glad you protected yourself, sweetheart, even if it meant standing up to family. The eviction proceedings took 3 months to resolve. Trevor tried to leverage his city council connections, but the building management company had documentation of multiple violations. Unauthorised occupants, unreported subletting, unpaid pet deposits for a dog they'd hidden, and evidence of unauthorised apartment modifications. The property manager had a paper trail going back months, suggesting he'd been building a case systematically. I wondered if Mr. Patterson, the manager who'd looked away when they evicted me in my first timeline, had been the one to report them, or perhaps Trevor's sister had complained after being exploited. Either way, the outcome was inevitable once the inspection began. They lost the apartment in month 4 of the proceedings. My aunt called me once during this period, asking if I'd be willing to write a character reference for Jade. I declined. I don't know Jade's character as a tenant, I said. I only know she offered me a sublease that violated lease terms and that I declined. I can't speak to anything beyond that. You could help her if you wanted to. I could lie for her, you mean? I won't do that. I'm sorry she's in a difficult situation, but it resulted from choices she made with full knowledge of the risks. I warned her about the legal implications when I declined the arrangement. My aunt's voice went cold. You've become very hard, Sienna. I've become very careful about documentation and legal protections. There's a difference. She hung up without saying goodbye, and we didn't speak again for 8 months. During this same period, My professional life flourished in ways that seemed almost suspiciously perfect. Except they weren't luck or coincidence. They were the direct result of stability enabling opportunity. When you're not worried about suddenly losing your housing, you can focus on excellence. When you can plan financially because your rent is fixed, you can invest in professional development. When you have a community of supportive colleagues in your building, you can collaborate on innovative projects. The curriculum framework I developed with the teacher study group was piloted in my school, then expanded to 3 other schools in the district, then adopted by 2 neighbouring districts. The recognition led to speaking invitations, publication opportunities, and eventually a leadership role in the State Education Association. Mrs. Chen attended my presentation at the State Education Conference, beaming with pride. "I knew you were special when you asked to have a lawyer review the lease," she told me afterward. "Most people think I'm being difficult when I insist on proper procedures. You understood that clear expectations protect everyone. You taught me that security enables success," I said. "I'm grateful you took a chance on me." "I didn't take a chance. I made an informed decision based on evidence of your character." She patted my arm. "That's the difference between gambling and investing. You showed me you were worth investing in." Year 3 brought 2 significant developments. I started dating James, a fellow teacher who'd moved into Mrs. Chen's building, and I received word that Jade was engaged, not to Trevor, but to someone new. James and I met in the building's laundry room, appropriately enough, arguing about whether standardized testing was destroying authentic learning. The debate continued over coffee, evolved over dinner, and deepened over the following months into something genuine and stable. "You're careful about boundaries," he observed one evening, 6 months into our relationship. "I've noticed you're meticulous about contracts, agreements, clear expectations. There's a history there." "I learned early that documentation matters," I said. "That promises without legal backing are just nice words. That family doesn't always mean safety." He nodded thoughtfully. "My sister went through something similar. Bad roommate situation that left her homeless for a while. She's never trusted verbal agreements since. Everything has to be in writing." "Smart?" "It is smart. It's also lonely sometimes, always being the one who insists on contracts and clarity." He took my hand. "But it means when you do trust someone enough to be vulnerable, it's real. It's not naive or hasty or wishful thinking. It's a choice made with full information." "Yes," I said, squeezing his hand. "Exactly that." The invitation to Jade's wedding arrived via mail, a formal card with elegant script. My aunt called the same day. "I know there's been distance," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "But Jade would really like you there. She's in a much better place now. David is a good man, an accountant, very stable. They're buying a condo together. I'm happy for her. Will you come?" I thought about it honestly. The old wounds had scarred over into something less raw, less consuming. Jade's choices had shaped her life. Mine had shaped mine. We diverged onto completely separate paths. Her happiness or lack thereof no longer had any bearing on my well-being. "I'll send a gift," I said finally. "But I don't think my attendance would be comfortable for anyone. Too much history." She wanted to apologise, face to face. Some apologies are better left unsaid. Whoop. We've both moved on. Let's leave it there. My aunt accepted this with more grace than I'd expected. "I understand. Thank you for being honest." I sent a generous gift card to a home furnishing store with a card that read, "Wishing you stability and happiness in your new home. May your foundation be solid and your documentation clear." I meant every word without irony. Whatever had happened, whatever might have happened, in my first timeline, I genuinely hoped she'd learn to value legal protection and clear contracts. The wedding happened without me. I spent that weekend hiking with James, and taking Mrs. Chen to a garden show she'd wanted to attend. We talked about education policy, rising housing costs, the importance of tenant protections, and Mrs. Chen's late husband's career as a civil rights attorney. Normal, stable, forward-looking conversations. That evening, James asked me to move in with him. "I know you love your apartment," he said carefully, "and I know stability matters to you more than romance or convenience. But there's a 2-bedroom opening up in the building next month. We could apply together. Both our names on the lease, equal legal standing, proper documentation." I kissed him instead of answering immediately, overwhelmed by the beauty of someone who understood that contracts meant safety, that legal standing meant respect, that documentation meant trust. "Yes," I said when I could speak. "Let's read the lease together," multiple times. We applied as co-tenants, went through Miss Chen's rigorous screening process together, and signed a lease that listed us both with equal rights and responsibilities. The apartment was larger, with room for a home office and a reading nook. The lease was comprehensive, fair, and protected both of us equally. James insisted on reading it twice. I read it 3 times. We hired Miss Rodriguez to review it, split the consultation fee, and filed the signed documents in a folder labelled Home Legal Documentation. Some people might have found it unromantic. We found it perfect. Year 4 brought professional recognition I'd never imagined in my first timeline. The magnet school, where I worked as assistant principal, won state awards for innovative programming. I was asked to present our curriculum framework at national education conferences. The speaking fees allowed me to establish a college fund for future children and a robust emergency savings account. More importantly, the stability allowed me to mentor younger teachers the way I wished someone had mentored me. I started a workshop series on practical life skills for new educators: how to read a lease, how to spot housing scams, how to build credit, how to negotiate contracts, how to document everything. The workshops were always full. "You're saving people from mistakes you made?" Amanda asked after one particularly well-attended session. "I'm sharing hard-won knowledge," I corrected. "Everyone deserves to understand their legal rights and protections, especially young people just starting their careers." One of my workshop attendees was a young teacher named Riley who'd been living in an informal subletting arrangement similar to what Jade had offered me. After the lease workshop, she consulted with Ms. Rodriguez, discovered she had no legal protections, and moved to legitimate housing within 6 weeks. 2 years later, she credited that decision with saving her career when her previous landlords were arrested for running a rental fraud scheme. "You taught me that documentation is self-respect," she told me at a district meeting. "That insisting on legal protections isn't paranoid, it's intelligent." I thought about my first self, the one who'd signed without reading, who'd trusted because she wanted to believe family meant safety. I wished I could tell her that caution wasn't cynicism, that boundaries weren't betrayal, that protecting yourself was an act of self-love. Instead, I taught workshops and mentored young teachers and made sure Ms. Rodriguez's contact information was distributed at every new educator orientation. Year 5 brought the State Education Gala, where my school received recognition for leadership in urban education innovation. I stood on stage accepting an award for program development, looking out at an audience that included my principal, my colleagues, Mrs. Chen, James, and, unexpectedly, my aunt. She'd come without telling me, sitting in the back row with my grandmother, bearing witness to a success she'd once tried to undermine by pushing me toward an exploitative housing arrangement. After the ceremony, she approached me in the reception area. My grandmother hung back, giving us space. "I'm proud of you, Sienna," my aunt said without preamble. "I should have said that years ago. I should have supported your decision to decline Jade's offer instead of criticising you for protecting yourself." "Thank you for saying that." I was wrong about the apartment, about family obligations, about what you owed Jade. She took a breath. I prioritized Jade's convenience over your safety. I pushed you toward a situation that would have destroyed your stability because I wanted to help her without considering the cost to you. I know. Do you think... She stopped, started again. Is there a way forward? Not back to how things were, but something new? Something honest? I considered carefully. The anger was gone, transmuted over 5 years into something closer to indifference. She'd failed me once, but I'd saved myself. The question was whether she'd learned anything, whether this apology represented genuine growth or just discomfort with estrangement. We can have coffee sometimes, I said finally. Start small, see how it goes. No expectations, no obligations, just 2 people trying to build something new. Her smile was tentative but real. I'd like that very much. We met for coffee twice a month after that. Never at her house, always in neutral locations. We talked about my work, her garden, my grandmother's health, safe topics that didn't require trust or intimacy. Gradually, cautiously, we built something that wasn't the family relationship we'd had before, but also wasn't the cold estrangement that had followed my decision. She attended my wedding to James the following year, sitting with my grandmother in the 3rd row. She sent appropriate gifts at appropriate times. She stopped offering unsolicited advice or making demands based on familial obligation. We found a cordial distance that worked for both of us. As for Jade, our paths crossed once more, unexpectedly, at a tenant rights advocacy event 5 years after my rebirth. She was volunteering with a non-profit that helped people understand lease agreements and avoid exploitative housing situations. We recognised each other across the room, but didn't immediately approach. Finally, during the break, she walked over. Sienna, I thought that might be you. Jade, it's good to see you. Is it? She smiled without bitterness. I wouldn't blame you if it weren't. I mean it. I'm glad you're doing this work. It's important. She looked at the information tables, the workshops on tenant rights, the lawyers offering free consultations. I learned the hard way what happens when you don't understand your legal protections. The eviction nearly destroyed me. Destroyed me and Trevor both, actually. We broke up 6 months after we lost the apartment. I'm sorry that was painful. Don't be. It needed to happen. She met my eyes. I need to say this. I'm sorry for what we tried to do to you. The sublease was exploitative. We knew it was risky legally, and we were planning to use you for income while keeping all the control. When you declined, we did the same thing to Trevor's sister. She lost months of her life to our selfishness. I appreciate you saying that. You saved yourself by being smart enough to read the contract and brave enough to walk away from family when they were trying to exploit you. I've spent 5 years wishing I'd had your courage to ask the hard questions before I signed my lease. She gestured at the event space. Now I try to give other people the knowledge I didn't have. That's genuine growth, Jade. Maybe. Or maybe it's penance. She pulled out a business card. If you ever want to, grab coffee, no obligations, no expectations, just 2 people who learned hard lessons about documentation and legal protections. I took the card. We never did get that coffee, but I kept the card in my desk as a reminder that people could change, that consequences could lead to growth, that the lessons we learned from our mistakes mattered. The years that followed were marked by steady compound growth, the kind that comes from stable foundations and clear documentation. James and I bought our unit from Mrs. Chen when she decided to sell the building to a tenant cooperative. We became co-op board members, ensuring that future residents would have the same clear leases and fair treatment we'd received. I became principal of my magnet school, then director of curriculum for the district. Every contract I signed, I read thoroughly. Every negotiation, I documented meticulously. Every young teacher I mentored, I taught about the importance of legal protections and clear expectations. Mrs. Chen died peacefully at 83, surrounded by the tenants she'd protected for decades. At her funeral, 17 current and former residents spoke about how her insistence on proper documentation and fair contracts had changed their lives. I was one of them. She taught me that legal protections are acts of love, I said in my eulogy, that clear contracts create security, and security enables growth. She gave me not just a home, but the foundation to build a life. Everything I've accomplished started with a lease that respected my rights as a tenant. My grandmother attended that funeral, and my aunt, and even Jade, who'd become friends with Mrs. Chen through the tenant advocacy work. We stood together afterwards, 3 generations of women who'd learned in different ways that documentation mattered, that legal standing mattered, that protecting yourself wasn't selfishness, it was wisdom. 10 years after my rebirth, I stood in the apartment James and I owned, looking at the filing cabinet that held a decade of contracts, leases, agreements, and documentation. Every significant decision of my second life was represented in those files: the lease I'd signed with Mrs. Chen, the employment contracts from my various positions, the co-op purchase agreement, James's and my marriage certificate, the mortgage documentation, the property deeds. Some people might say it was paranoid to keep such meticulous records. But those people had never lost everything because of a single unsigned clause, never been erased by people who listed them as tenants without rights. James found me in the office, recognised the contemplative mood. Thinking about the filing cabinet again? Thinking about how different life is when you're actually on the documents that govern your existence. Documentation is love, he said, repeating our shared mantra. Documentation is love, I agreed. We taught that principle to countless young teachers, mentored dozens of people through housing crises, volunteered with tenant rights organisations, and built a life on the foundation of clear contracts and mutual respect. Jade and Trevor had tried to list me as a tenant with no rights, planning to erase me when it became convenient. In my second life, I'd ensured my name was on every document that mattered, backed by law and protected by proper procedure. I wasn't invisible anymore. I couldn't be erased. I was the author of my own story, and every chapter was signed, dated, filed in triplicate, and protected by the full force of law. That made all the difference.